The jungle didn't roar, it hissed, a wet, low hiss that crept along the underbrush and oozed from the canopy above like a warning. Slender stalks of blue-veined ferns reached down like claws, damp from the morning mist. The air was thick, not just with moisture but with a sort of watching silence. As if the land itself waited. Axel Zane crouched beside a shallow stream, the water coursing lazily over smooth stones. His boots were caked in the reddish mud that clung like glue, and sweat had long since soaked through the collar of his shirt. He reached into the side pocket of his battered pack and pulled out a crumpled piece of cloth. "Filter first," he muttered, more to himself than anyone else. Behind him, 4 alien cadets stood in a loose cluster, their skin a palette of greens and silvers, each distinct in appearance but united in their unease. They watched Axel with the kind of wary curiosity reserved for someone handling explosives. "Why not just extract the hydrogen separately and synthesize drinkable compounds?" asked Kersh, the tallest among them, his skin patterned in shifting olive swirls. "Because I don't have a lab, Kersh." "I have a sock," Axel said, holding up the faded tube sock he'd rinsed earlier and packed with layers pebbles at the bottom, followed by charcoal, sand, and a layer of cloth at the top. "And I've got about 30 minutes before dehydration becomes a real problem." Kersh blinked all 4 of his eyes. "You plan to drink that?" "Yep. You're aware of the microbial presence in this biome, the excretions from the Trellis burrowers alone, I know. That's why we're boiling it after this." He held the sock filter contraption steady with 2 sticks and let the cloudy stream water drip through, collecting in a battered metal canteen below. It took time. The cadets shifted, clearly uncomfortable with the process. Axel glanced back at them. "If you've got a better plan, I'm all ears." No one answered. They'd been dropped here on Vyerx 8 as part of a joint Terra survival exercise. The alien cadets were part of the Zentari Officer Academy, bright-eyed and theory-hardened. Axel had been brought in as a primitive survival advisor, a fancy title for someone who could keep breathing long enough to show others how to. Tensions had been high from the start. The cadets had all kinds of equipment that had failed within hours of landing, solar condensers jammed, drones overheated, water analyzers fried. The humidity here did things to tech that no one had predicted. But Axel's gear, simple, durable, mostly cloth, metal, and instinct. A low growl echoed from the tree line. "Again," Axel muttered, drawing his machete slowly. "Quadruped approximately 2 meters tall," said Risha, the smallest of the 4 cadets. Her voice was thin, the translator clipped. "Heat signature shows it's circling behind the ridge." Axel didn't respond. He uncapped the canteen, sniffed it, then poured it into a small pot and set it onto a collapsible stove. The flame hissed like the jungle. "You're not worried?" asked Tavan, twitching his segmented arms. "Terrified," Axel said, "but we need water more than we need to chase ghosts." The stove flickered. The water began to bubble. Risha stepped closer, watching the pot. "You use combustion, direct heat." "Fire's old, but it works. No moving parts, no software." "Just fuel and flame." The cadets fell silent again, watching the water boil. After a few minutes, Axel pulled the pot away carefully, let it cool, then poured it into a clean container. "Drink slow," he said, handing it to Risha first. "It's been hours." "If you gulp, you'll cramp." She hesitated, then sipped. Her throat clicked once as she swallowed. "It's safe enough." One by one, the cadets took their turn. Kersh was last, his expression unreadable. "Back on your world," he said. "Do your kind always do this? Use such crude systems?" "Only when we want to stay alive." The jungle hissed again. An hour later, they moved, following the stream bed east toward higher ground. With water in their systems, their pace improved. Axel led, machete swinging in slow arcs to clear the overgrowth. Vines snapped wetly. Insects buzzed like miniature engines. "Look out," Tavan shouted. Axel ducked instinctively as something green and spiked lashed from the underbrush. It nicked his shoulder, slicing through fabric and skin alike. He dropped to one knee, gritting his teeth. Kersh fired his pulse beam into the bush. The creature, a snake-like thing with spines like glass, burst into steam as it died. Axel hissed through his teeth and held his shoulder. Blood seeped through his shirt. "Let me treat it," said Risha, already pulling out a med kit. No antiseptics, Axel said. They don't work the same on me, just clean it and bandage it. She hesitated, then nodded. Tavan hovered nearby, his fingers twitching. It moved too fast. We should have scanned more thoroughly before crossing this area. Scanners don't catch everything, Axel said. That's why I cut the path slow. Risha poured clean water over the wound, then packed it with gauze and wrapped it tightly. Axel hissed once but didn't flinch otherwise. That'll need stitches later, she said. I'll live. They camped that night under a natural overhang of black stone. Axel helped dig a shallow trench around the perimeter, taught the cadets how to use branches and thorny vines as natural deterrents against local predators, and set up a simple water collection tarp using spare canvas and gravity. Tavan watched the tarp drip with condensation into a bowl. You rely on gravity, sunlight, fire, all uncontrolled variables. Axel leaned against the stone wall, half-lidded eyes watching the canopy. They're not uncontrolled, they're just not programmable. The cadets didn't sleep. Their species didn't require it the way humans did. Axel, however, passed out from exhaustion the moment he lay down. His dreams were a mess of vines, boiling water, and the endless hiss of unseen things watching. By morning, the wound on his shoulder had stiffened. He tested it gently and winced. You need medical attention, Risha said. We can call for a vac. Not yet, Axel said. We've still got 3 days left. If I can move, I can teach. They moved slowly that day. The jungle grew denser, wetter. Twice they were forced to cross streams waist deep, one of which carried razor-scaled fish that bit at Kersh's legs until Axel shoved him out and stomped the creatures away with a branch. They reached a plateau by late afternoon. From there, the jungle stretched endlessly, green and steaming. We need more water, Axel said, kneeling beside a muddy pool. He pulled out his sock again, replaced the sand, added fresh charcoal from last night's fire, and began filtering. Kersh crouched beside him. Why charcoal? Absorbs impurities. And it's porous enough to catch things we can't see. You're saying firewood can purify our fluids, not on its own, but yeah, if you burn it right and use it right. Kersh stared at the sock slowly dripping clear water. Your species is absurd. Axel chuckled faintly. We get that a lot. That night the rain came, a thick, warm sheet that turned the ground to soup. Their camp held barely. The tarp collected gallons of water. Axel boiled it in batches while the cadets stood watch. Lightning lit up the trees in eerie flashes. Once they saw the silhouette of a creature 3 meters tall watching from the ridge, then vanish when lightning struck again. By the 3rd day, Axel was limping. His shoulder throbbed, and red streaks had started to form around the edges of the bandage. He didn't say anything. Risha noticed anyway. You're going septic. Not yet. If your fever spikes, you'll collapse. Then we'll call a vac. They reached a clearing where an ancient alien structure jutted from the earth, half swallowed by vines. The cadets scanned it with wide eyes. Axel sat at the edge of the clearing, filtering more water through the sock, his hands shaking slightly. Tavan approached with a canteen. You're still doing it, even when you're sick. Water's the only thing keeping us alive out here. Tavan watched the sock drip. We thought this exercise was about terrain adaptation, combat readiness, but it's not. It's about staying alive long enough to matter. Kersh joined them, silent for once. Risha crouched beside Axel, checked his forehead with the back of her hand. Fever's rising, he nodded. Time to call it in. She activated the beacon. The signal pulsed skyward. As the evac shuttle descended hours later, the cadets stood in silence. Axel lay against a tree, eyes closed, breathing slow. You'll need antibiotics, Risha said. I know. You should have called sooner. I wanted you to learn first. Kersh crouched beside him. We thought you were just a relic, a primitive, but you understood this world better than any of us. Axel laughed weakly. I understood water. The shuttle touched down. Medics rushed out, stabilizing Axel for transport. As they lifted him aboard, Risha called out, What else can you do with a sock? Axel grinned faintly. Wait till I show you how to make fire with a shoelace. Then the shuttle lifted off, leaving the jungle behind. The cadets stood, watching the trees sway, the filtered water still dripping into the bowl, clear and steady. The shuttle's rear hatch hissed open, and Axel blinked against the sudden sterility of it, all white lights, smooth walls, and the faint scent of antiseptic. The medics moved quickly, guiding him onto a padded stretcher. His shoulder pulsed with heat, and his vision wavered at the edges, but he stayed conscious, watching the jungle recede through the open hatch. Kersh leaned in before the doors sealed. "You'll be debriefed." "But I think they're going to ask you to come back." Axel didn't answer. The edge of fever had started to blur his thoughts, and everything tasted like copper. By the time the shuttle docked at the orbital field station, the infection had spread. A red line had crept toward his collarbone, and the skin around the wound had gone hard and glossy. They rushed him into a pressure-stabilized med bay, stripped away the soaked bandages, and began flushing the wound with saline and a wide-spectrum antibiotic gel. "Hold still," said the attending nurse. Her accent was clipped, probably Martian-born. "We're inserting a drain. Local anesthetic won't help much with the inflammation this deep." Axel bit down on the rubber mouthpiece they gave him. Every movement felt like glass being ground into his shoulder. They lanced the abscess, pressed, and he could feel the pus and fluid evacuating like a release valve. He nearly passed out from the smell alone. A few hours later, bandaged and hooked to a drip, he sat propped in a cot in the recovery wing. The room was quiet, save for the soft chime of vitals monitors and the occasional shuffle of movement beyond the curtain. At some point, the curtain parted, and Kersh stepped in, ducking slightly to fit beneath the arch. He held a tablet in one hand but didn't consult it. "You're recovering slower than projected," Kersh said. "Yeah," Axel rasped. "Turns out jungle rot doesn't care about projections." Kersh tilted his head. "You allowed the infection to develop too far. Why not treat it earlier?" Axel stared at him. "Because we were 2 days' hike from anything resembling help, and I was busy keeping your blood inside your body. You know, priorities." Kersh remained still, expression unreadable. "We reviewed your footage, the filtration process, the use of burned plant residue. It's inefficient, but effective. Glad you're impressed. Maybe you'll pack socks next time." "I've packed 3. Axel leaned back against the cot. "You didn't come down just to talk about my gear." "There's a request pending," Kersh said. "The Academy is opening an extended field trial in Sector 9. Denser terrain, fewer pre-surveyed paths. They want you to lead. Give me a week to stop smelling like vinegar and death first. You'll have 10 days. Kersh paused. "Also, they're rotating in a new cadet unit. Less theoretical training, more volunteer-based." Axel gave a dry laugh. "So they're sending the daredevils, or the ones who think they are." Late that evening, a new face appeared beside his cot. This one had angular features, light green skin, and wore a short, high-collared tunic that suggested diplomatic clearance more than academy rank. "I'm told you're the reason 4 cadets came back without organ damage," she said. "Only part of the reason. The jungle was in a good mood." She didn't smile. "I'm Commander Viral, oversight for cross-species adaptability programs. I'd like to offer you a temporary commission, field operative." "Autonomous authority," Axel frowned. "That sounds like it comes with strings." "It does, but they're long ones. You'd be operating alone with the option to request cadet teams." "What's the catch?" "We're preparing long-term settlements on Arkan's belt. Terraforming won't be viable for another 90 years, but there are seed outposts being established. The terrain is worse than Vyark's 8. Less moisture, more subterranean threats. We need someone who thinks like a survivor." He stared at the Roman 4 bag for a moment. "You're sending me to a death trap." "We're sending you where others have already died trying," Axel sighed. "Let me heal, then we'll talk." She nodded once, turned, and disappeared through the curtain. By the 5th day, his fever had broken, though his shoulder still ached deep in the tissue. He was cleared to walk, but not to lift anything heavier than a food tray. He took slow laps around the observation deck, watching the arc of the jungle planet beneath them, its clouds curling like smoke over green continents. On the 6th day, he found Risha in the station's greenhouse, standing between rows of cultivated mosses and imported rootstocks. "You're walking," she said without turning. "Barely. Looks like you're getting into botany. These plants are from the outer rim of the jungle. We harvested samples before evac. I've been analyzing their growth under controlled light." Axel leaned against the wall, trying to replicate the environment, trying to understand why your filtration worked. "This moss here, It secretes a compound that breaks down heavy metals. You were filtering through it without realizing, he blinked. I thought that was just a spongy weed. It's not. It's naturally chelating. Your sock filter was more effective than anyone guessed because the moss was doing half the work. Axel gave a half laugh. So I blindly stumbled into biochemistry. Risha offered the faintest nod. Blind survival is still survival. They stood in silence for a moment, the greenhouse warm and filled with the hum of grow lights. You know I've been asked to go back, he said. I assumed. You think it's worth it, Risha traced a finger along a leaf. The jungle doesn't care if you're brave or clever, but it responds to persistence. You persisted. The next morning he suited up. His shoulder was still stiff, but the wound had closed. He packed light canvas roll, machete, a new water flask, and a few meters of cord. No electronics, no sensors. Just what he could carry and fix with his own hands. At the hangar, Kersh waited beside the new transport shuttle. Two other cadets stood off to the side, both younger, both watching him with open curiosity. One had mottled silver skin and carried a hand-drawn map. The other wore patches sewn onto their uniform by hand, the threading uneven. This the new team? Axel asked. They've been told not to expect luxuries, Kersh said. Good, because I'm not bringing any. He stepped onto the ramp, the metal humming beneath his boots. The cadets followed quiet. The jungle loomed beyond the viewport, already cloaked in dawn mist. As the shuttle lifted, Risha's voice came through the calm. You forgot something. What? A spare sock, he laughed. I'll make do. The second drop was quieter, no grand introductions, no speeches from orbit, no camera drones whirring overhead. Just a low-altitude descent, and the heavy thunk of boots hitting wet soil. The new cadets stepped out behind Axel, their gear lighter and far less ornamental than their predecessors. One carried a rucksack made of stitched mylar and a repurposed flotation bladder. The other had no bag at all, just a utility belt and a folded net pressed under one arm. The landing zone was a clearing of pale grass ringed by squat, knotted trees with limbs that bent in unnatural arcs. No visible water nearby, no rock formations tall enough to offer shelter, and the air smelled faintly of sulfur and crushed mint leaves. Axel crouched and pulled a handful of soil into his hand. It was slick and clumped like undercooked oatmeal. Middle canopy runoff, he said, letting it drop. We're on a floodplain. Won't stay dry if it rains. The smaller cadet, a silver-skinned one with bony ridges down the neck and no visible pupils, looked up at the sky. The vapor density's high, precipitation within half a cycle. Then we move, Axel said. What's your name, Farron, and you? He asked the taller one, Jatho. All right, Farron, your point, Jatho, rear, keep no more than 3 meters between us. We're going to find elevation. They moved northeast through a corridor of leaning trunks coated in dangling moss that released a sticky sap when brushed. Jatho got a strand across his face within minutes, and spent the next 5 trying not to gag as the scent intensified with body heat. Don't scrape it, Axel warned. It'll burn through cloth if it dries. You could have said that sooner. Consider it a bonding experience. They found a ridge near dusk, a spine of dark stone that rose just above the treetops. Climbing it required careful placement, some of the rock flaked under weight, and more than once, Farron had to reroute when a handhold disintegrated. Axel waited until they were all up before digging into his pack. He pulled out a folded poly tarp, unfolded it, and started tying it between 2 bent branches at shoulder height, using loops of cord and tension knots that held even when the wind picked up. Jatho watched in silence, then knelt to help secure the corners with sharpened stakes. Farron unpacked a coiled mesh and spread it across the ground beneath the tarp. It snapped into shape with a soft click, a self-expanding sleep grid. Axel raised his eyebrows. Didn't think you packed anything. I didn't. Found it in the shuttle's dead storage. Good eye. That night the wind shifted. It came in low and thick, pushing warm air through the trees with a sound like distant whispering. Axel slept fitfully, waking often to check the perimeter. Around second sleep, something knocked over the edge stones they'd placed around camp. Jatho sprang up, weapon drawn, but nothing emerged, just the sound of retreating claws against bark. Farron sat up, rubbing his head. How close was it? Too close. Axel said. Tomorrow we build deterrents. By morning the wind had stopped. The air was still and heavier than before. Farron retrieved the net embedded with scent markers from under his gear and strung it around the camp's edge, weaving it through nearby roots and rocks. The markers released a chemical that mimicked the musk of a local apex predator. Unpleasant, but effective. Jatho, meanwhile, worked beside Axel to dig a shallow trench for waste runoff and water diversion. He used a folding blade tool with a serrated edge but kept jamming on root clusters. "You're better off using a stick," Axel said, handing him a splintered branch. "Let the tool rest. Save it for when we need to cut something that bleeds." Jatho took the stick, tested the weight, and nodded once. "You're not what I expected. Good." "I'd be worried if I was." As midday approached, Farron returned from a scouting loop with a canister of murky liquid. Found a depression west of the ridge. Water's slow-moving but not stagnant. Might be usable. Axel unscrewed the lid and sniffed. Tannins, plant runoff. "Needs filtering." "No sock this time," Farron asked, trying something new. He pulled out a hollowed gourd, stuffed it with alternating layers of crushed bark, heated sand, and a fibrous plant sponge Farron had collected the day before. At the base, he tied off the stem with a bit of cloth from his undershirt. Water poured through slowly, beating at the base into a shallow bowl. Farron tilted his head. "You're using the gourd's own inner membrane as part of the filter." "Yep, it's semi-permeable. Slows the flow, catches the sediment. Primitive. Functional." They boiled the filtered water in a solar kettle, an accordion-like metal shell with a reflective lining that focused heat into a central tube. Jatho watched the water bubble, then turned to Axel. "You carry a lot of knowledge." "But no tech. Knowledge doesn't short out in the rain." "Then why do my people always send tech?" "Because it's easier to replace machinery than humility." They drank slowly, the heated water tasting faintly of bark and minerals, not pleasant but not dangerous. Later, Axel went to check the perimeter. His shoulder ached. It wasn't the stabbing pain of infection anymore, but a deep tightness that worsened with cold. He rubbed it absently as he walked, stepping over a fallen trunk covered in nodules that hissed when disturbed. He heard Farron approach from behind, soft-footed. "Your gait is changed," Farron said. "Old injury, not your worry." "I wasn't offering concern. Observation only." Duly noted. They paused at the edge of the ridge. Below, the jungle stretched in all directions, a carpet of swaying greens and browns. In the distance, columns of steam rose where thermal vents cut through the canopy. "We're not alone out here," Farron said. "We never are." "No, I mean I saw movement, something upright." "Same direction we came from. Local or cadet. Didn't move like either." Axel watched the tree line. "We'll keep the camp tight tonight, no fire." That evening, they laid out dried root chips and a protein paste Farron had rehydrated with boiled water. No one spoke much. The air buzzed with unseen insects, and the leaves overhead rustled without wind. Hours passed. Axel lay awake, listening. At some point, Jatho breathed deeply beside him, not quite snoring, but rhythmic. Farron shifted every so often, likely watching the perimeter through his half-lidded eyes. Then soft crunching. Not from inside the camp, but from just beyond the scent net. Deliberate. Slow, Axel reached for his blade, then froze. A silhouette appeared at the edge of the trees. Tall, thin, moving with a strange, jerking grace. It stopped at the boundary, sniffed once, and took a step back. Then it vanished into the dark with a rustle of leaves. He didn't sleep after that. By dawn, the trail was gone. No prints, no broken branches. Whatever it was had known to leave no trace. They packed up camp silently. As they prepared to move, Farron handed Axel a flat, folded square, found it in the brush. "Looks like part of a ration wrapper." Axel turned it over. The markings were human military issue. Someone's been here before us. Recently? Hard to say. Could have been weeks ago. They climbed down the ridge. The jungle swallowed them again. By late afternoon, they reached a clearing with a wide, slow stream. Axel filtered a sample, watched the sediment settle, and nodded. "This'll work." They set camp again, more efficiently this time. Farron scavenged bark resin to use as waterproofing. Jatho built a windbreak using flat stones and local reed bundles. Axel boiled water while checking his shoulder. The inflammation had receded fully, but a tight scar ran from his collarbone to his upper arm. He flexed gently, testing the range. "Still healing?" Farron asked. "Still human?" "That's not a medical condition. Depends who you ask." That night, nothing approached the camp. The air stayed still, the jungle quiet. They ate, drank, and stared at the canopy overhead. Jatho broke the silence. "What happens if we fail this cycle?" "You don't." "Not what I asked." Axel leaned back against a pack. "You adapt, you learn fast, you're already doing it." Farron tilted his head. "And if we hadn't, I'd have kept you alive anyway. How can you be sure?" "Because I didn't come here to die, and I don't like being alone." They slept soundly that night. By the next morning, the stream was still clear. The filter gourd had held up. No signs of movement nearby, no threats. No signs of whatever had watched them before. They packed up camp and began the long walk back toward the extraction zone. The air smelled cleaner. The path was easier. At the edge of the ridge, Axel paused and looked back. Farron stepped beside him. "You left the gourd. Someone else might need it." Jatho joined them. "Do you think they'll teach your methods at the academy?" "No," Axel said. "They'll write about them, but they'll modify everything, clean it up. Lose half the point." "Which is?" "Sometimes survival's just knowing which stick to trust." They walked on, the jungle folding closed behind them, quiet and watching but no longer hostile.